Overwatch is definitely not going to be killed by Deadlock. In fact, I don't think there's much competition between the two of them. They kind of occupy pretty different game genres, and different types of people are going to play them. So I don't think Overwatch is really going to be threatened by Deadlock, even if a small section of players decide they like this game a little better. They occupy, again, different spaces within the shooter genre. However, I do think that they not necessarily share similarities, but I think there are some lessons that I have learned about Overwatch from having played Deadlock. Basically, some things that have kind of opened my eyes a little more to some design things about Overwatch, and what basically we can learn from what Deadlock is doing. What can Overwatch be improved, or what in Overwatch can be improved based on what Deadlock is doing. And I will want to let you know that this footage is from a couple weeks ago. I was pretty early on playing the game. I have about 20 hours in it now. I think I understand it a lot better. I found my characters that I like. Viscous, I love Viscous. Oh my god, he's so funny. But just so you know, if you're watching me kill minions and not kill the soul coming out of them, that's why. So this gameplay is a little bad, but I think it is perfectly okay just for you guys to watch. It's the only game that I've actually streamed on Twitch. So anyways, basically what I want to talk about are three main things that I'm just going to go in order here as I've written them down. But I want to talk about the simplification of the genre for MOBAs, right? Because if you've played any MOBAs before, you may know that Deadlock is pretty easy to get into for a MOBA, right? It's got a lot of MOBA elements. It's got all the item buying. It's got all the weird interactions and, abilities that do a lot of things, and active items and a million different buttons you have to keep track of. It's got all the lanes and the minions and the PvE stuff within the PvP game. But compared to most MOBAs, I have found it to be pretty freeing, pretty free rather, open-ended, less so than a lot of the others. You are assigned a lane to start with, but within the structure of the game, after about 10 minutes or so, you're really not supposed to be focusing only on one lane. You're supposed to be running around, kind of doing other things, going and getting jungle camps. You're trying to get do team fights in the mid game, maybe doing the mid boss, stuff like that. Basically, they've got a bunch of different elements, like souls are shared in lanes, so you don't have to hard optimize who is getting what souls. It doesn't like suck the fun out of it, but also it rewards some skill about, like, well, the people who deny the souls get the extra souls. So then you're kind of incentivized, your skill is incentivized too, so you get a little more rewarded than necessarily the other person in your lane, right? Again, I was talking about it being more open, less individual lanes, and you just kind of all share stuff and go wherever is needed. That is also especially good for when there are characters that your team is maybe not, or the people in that lane isn't so good against. So later in the game, if you're good against that character, instead you could go over there and do stuff like that, right? You don't have to kind of be stuck fighting a losing matchup, because that's just how the game was presented to you. You can actually mix it up and try to even the odds a little bit more there. The game is easy to understand, easy to jump into, which is not as common for the MOBA genre. I've tried to play League in the past, and it just does not make any sense to me. There is a lot of external research you have to do to figure out, who's supposed to last kill these minions? When am I supposed to do these camps? When am I supposed to do anything? And it just doesn't make as much sense. With this game, I feel like I've been able to hop right in and get into it. And basically, it allows you, when you have less things to worry about, like these really less minute, like super optimizations, and maybe this is just because the game is new, but when you have these optimizations that you don't really have to worry about, you're allowed to hone in and practice the things that make the game more fun, because there's less things to worry about. You can really dig deep into the other stuff of the game, the item buying, the builds, the team fights, the ability usage, right? All the stuff, kind of some of the stuff that, from Overwatch we really liked, teamwork and ability usage, all the characters have their own stuff. It's that kind of stuff, right? But really, that actually reminds me when I talk about, there's less things for you to focus on, less things to worry about, so you can really engage with the things that are left. That reminds me a lot of a lesson that Overwatch learned pretty early on. Especially when, what's it called? Not role lock quite yet, but when you could only have one character of each on each team, right? When they learned that lesson, the game became a lot easier to engage with. You're not just going to have these random, completely insane comps, Basically, when the comps in Overwatch got limited because of that, and then later role lock, yes, there was some, depth, I guess, lost in the game, but also it allows you to really sink your teeth into the format more, because there's only so many possible combinations that you're able to really focus and learn what is there, right? With Deadlock, it's a similar situation where I don't have to worry about all of these super minute mechanics. I can focus on my ability usage. I can focus on winning my lane better than my opponent. I can focus on macro play a lot more than just these tiny minutia, right? You see me, I didn't even have a build. If you couldn't, I didn't have a build saved. I was using the suggested items. That's how much of a noob I was at this point. But yeah, basically, I think that the general thing that we should take from this is that Deadlock has been received really well for a MOBA, especially from people who do already play MOBAs. But it has a lot of things in this game that I feel like, if this isn't the case, let me know, but I feel like could be considered dumbing the genre down, right? There are, again, that I would call it a quality of life thing about, sharing souls in lane or stuff like that, any of those kind of things. Some people might say that, it kind of makes it a little brainless. It makes it not as, in depth. Every single decision isn't as thought out. The micro isn't there. And this is something that I think Overwatch has kind of been struggling back and forth with for a while now, right? There's a lot of people who say a lot of the changes that they made have dumbed the game down, that it's not really the same game of Overwatch as much anymore. And then other people who think that a lot of these changes, maybe like wave respawns and maybe the global health passive and stuff like that, those kind of system changes have actually really benefited the game and gotten you more on track to what you want to be doing more often, right? And that's kind of like my stance, at least in Overwatch. But just because a game is technically dumbed down does not mean that the rest of the game suffers. In fact, many times I feel like games, when they hone their scale in and what they want to do, they actually become much more refined experiences, and they find their niche better, and you get to focus on that niche. And I think it has really worked out for Deadlock, because I just do not really like MOBAs. I do not like how really strict you have to play them, and Deadlock feels so much more open-ended, at least for me. Again, this is kind of personal preference, of course, but I find that to be a really good thing, and I think that when Deadlock continues to get more people in, especially with some pretty simple to understand and pretty fun, easy characters as well, I think that Deadlock is going to really find an audience as it expands wider and wider, and you don't just have to get an invite from somebody, although it is extremely easy to get in. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say, that simplification is not necessarily a bad thing. It is something that is demonized a lot, I think. But I don't think that, I think Deadlock and Valve have really learned the lesson that it's like, it doesn't really matter that much, right? It doesn't matter if the game is simple. The game should be fun and rewarding and engaging. And that can come from simplicity. I don't think that's a terrible thing, right? So, with that out of the way, that's the first main one. The second main one I have is just, we have got it great in Overwatch with character abilities. MOBAs have a bit of some legacy design things. Deadlock has a couple of legacy MOBA design things in it. And particularly the ones that I have had the problem with, and I've got a couple points to talk about this, I'm not just going to be complaining for a second here, is that there are a lot of offensive mechanics and abilities that your characters have that will guarantee value on the enemy team. There is no skill shot. You basically just look at them and you place it on them. That kind of stuff. Yes, there's some range that you have to be in, but for the most part, to me, when there is no skill shot or any really nuance, now obviously when you use it and all that stuff, that is important, but just kind of guaranteeing yourself value just by looking at somebody and getting your ability off, to me, is a really weird thing for a shooter player. In a MOBA, I totally understand that guaranteed damage and guaranteed value is built into the core because health is so finite and it is not much of a renewable resource, at least in the battlefield. So a character's strength coming from guaranteed value basically puts you on a ticking timer to be like, I have to get my thing done before I am forced to leave and go back, right? But Deadlock is not that strict with it. Sure, you do have to get back to base, but it's really fast to get back and forth between bases. You'll see I'm playing 7 here. He's got a pulse thing that when you put it on somebody, after a couple seconds, they will just get stunned. And that is kind of the thing, right? In a shooter game like this, Deadlock, I think you get your health regen back more so than most. I think lifesteal is a pretty important part for most character kits and builds in this game, although it doesn't have to be, but I think a lot of characters will really like it. I think 7 really likes it, the character that I'm playing right now. And it just doesn't seem like it fits in with a game, especially a genre like a shooter, where mechanics are so much more focused, right? The counterplay to these abilities come from items, right? They come from builds and stuff, and not necessarily being able to outplay them in the moment. You kind of have to outplay them, kind of outsmart them, if that makes sense. But the thing is that you can do that with skill shots and stuff too. You can do it in multiple different ways. So in my opinion, I am not super big fan, at least for this game, those guaranteed offensive mechanics. And I wanted to talk about this because, to be honest with you, Overwatch doesn't really have this kind of stuff. There is plenty of guaranteed value, do not get me wrong, but it is not something that most of those, I can't even think of any examples that directly just affect the enemy without you having to be in a good position for it, that they can't outplay, that they can't juke, or, stuff like that, right? The guaranteed value type of characters, just looking at somebody putting a break pack down, it's more defensive. It is more enabling your team or yourself rather than it is disrupting the enemy. And I think that is a very important distinction that can be made between some of the abilities in this game and some of the abilities in Overwatch. And I think that it's something that we kind of take for granted, although there are plenty of, easy characters we don't like, characters that we feel like get a lot of value for free. Technically, they do not get as much value for free as characters in this game. I think Malga Cardiac on a tank, and even though that's kind of debatable now because it's been heavily nerfed, and I don't think Malga's very good right now, but that isn't that would be kind of the closest thing I can think into offensive value. You just sit there and you shoot the tank and everything because they're just so big, tank buster stuff. But then again, we also have armor and things to mitigate that built in to the game, right? So I don't know. I think that Overwatch does it really well, and it's something that we've taken for granted. Once I've played other games like this, that, and again, there are other ways to counterplay in Deadlock. It really comes between items and builds and kind of actively choosing your items around what other people in the lobby have. In Overwatch, you have to choose your playstyle more, and of course in Deadlock you do too. But you have to choose your playstyle and how you play things. That is really going to matter. More so than anything else. So basically, I find those types of abilities very annoying, and in Deadlock, because I'm new to it and I don't quite understand the item system so much, that it has frustrated me a lot. And when I go back to Overwatch, I'm like, well, at least I'm not getting full map stun just because somebody looked at me and hit a button, basically, and they didn't even have to aim it per chance. It was just pretty easy, pretty guaranteed to get there. So, all right. And the last one I want to talk about is I wanted to talk about Push. Because Push is a game mode that I actually like. I like it in Overwatch 2. I understand that it has some flaws with it, but I really don't think it's a bad mode. And I think that a lot of the hate for it has been overblown for a while. And I think a lot of the maps, I've come around to a lot of the maps. New Queen Street I didn't like at the beginning of the game, and I think it's perfectly fine now. And Colosseo has gotten a bit of an upgrade, although it's still not my favorite map ever, but it's okay. What I want to talk about Push is that you may have noticed this game is like playing a gigantic Push tug of war. Let's be real, right? I mean, look at that. There's 4 lanes that you push back and forth depending on what your minion lane is. So it's basically a more complicated game of Overwatch's Push. If you can push all the way in and all the way through to the end, you just win. And of course, that is the only win condition in Deadlock. In Overwatch, the timer may run out. But effectively in Deadlock, the timer can just run out. And if you just lose a full team fight, then you're going to spawn in 70 seconds. And they're going to be able to push the whole map and a bunch of other stuff too. It's going to effectively be a loss in that regard. But what I wanted to talk about is that I think that in Push, one of the things that people get really upset with is defenders' advantage in Push. It's because it feels like, you know, you push all the way, and the further you push, the better you do, the harder and harder it gets to win. A lot of people say that it's artificial, and you know what, that is not necessarily a wrong take. Like, it's not the wrong thing to say, but I think it's a little disingenuous, because I think a lot of maps work just like that, where the further you go, you know, the defenders have, you know, it's harder to push in. They'll get spawns back, they have better positioning, stuff like that, right? So I think it's a little disingenuous, but I get where the sentiment comes from. What I want to talk about more is that in Deadlock, the defender's advantage, you know, it's supposed to be like fair, right? So if my team were doing much better than the other team, then we are going to have a much easier time taking the game, right? We're gonna have a much easier time trying to win and get through, especially near the end, right? Because at the end, especially at the end of the game where you're actually going to be ending the game, right? Like over the 30-ish minute time, or like the 30th minute mark or something like that, where your respawns are longer and longer, defenders do not really have the advantage, right? In fact, the attackers typically do have the advantage at the end. And to me, combined with the very long respawn times at the end of games, and, you know, basically the attacking team being able to somewhat ignore you when you come back just to hound the patron, and which is the final base, you know, when they kill the patron, they win the game. It feels really frustrating. It feels pretty anticlimactic. It feels like there should have been some last chance, you know, like, I don't want to say comeback mechanic, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, games are just kind of uninteresting when they just end like that. It's so anticlimactic. I died for 70 seconds and I watched 2 shrines die. My patron died twice in a row. And sometimes you'll even come back to the fight. You know, they haven't killed the patron yet. It has full health. Your team comes in, and it is just more valuable for them to shoot the patron with every resource that they have and burn it down, even though your team has all of your resources and are back. It actually just felt like there was nothing you could do to stop them at that point, right? I understand that if that team is more fed and they're playing better, then yes, they should win the game, and they're much more likely to win the game. But I can't help but feel that it's just frustrating. It's kind of boring. It's kind of anticlimactic. I'm not a big fan of the end game of this game at all, but me not really having any way, like, there are points in the game where I am going to have no way to fight back effectively, just doesn't really do it for me. I think it's just not engaging. In Push, in Overwatch, you always have a chance to come back. Now, you know, it's harder. Obviously, it's harder, but you always have a chance to. And, you know, it doesn't happen that often, but it's still, like, not out of the question that you are going to be able to push it all the way back from, you know, from the end, basically, in overtime, have this crazy long push. And those types of games feel really good because all the other team had to do was win one fight out of the 2, 3, or 4 that they had to fight in that entire time, and they just couldn't do it. And you guys played more effectively in that time. when it really mattered. And I think that's totally fine. I think that's actually really fun and engaging, and it feels really rewarding for you. So basically, you know, I feel like I talked a lot of mumbo jumbo about Deadlock if you're not as familiar with Deadlock. Basically, I like the defender's advantage in a tug of war type of game. It is supposed to be a tug of war. It is supposed to be going back and forth and back and forth. That is when that is when push feels like at its best. That is when Deadlock feels like it's at its best. When you guys, you know, have, you know, a couple like wars going on. Like this game you're gonna be seeing is gonna end pretty soon. But look, we've pushed all the lanes basically, right? We have pushed all our lanes up. We're having a really good team fight. I can't remember what happens here. We win this game in the next 7 minutes or so. Maybe I die here. Who knows? Because I suck. But yeah, I think this warden comes and chases me down. But basically the idea here is that like our soul count is much higher than theirs. We're in a much better position to them, and we can just end the game. Like that's it. Just straight up. We have so much of an advantage that we can just come in and end the game, and there's really nothing that they can do about it. Just for real, right? That's frustrating. That is really frustrating as the other team. I think as the team that is down, it's just like, what do we do at this point? It's the beginning of the game mattered so much that the end of the game just doesn't. Like, why am I even playing the game anymore, right? And I think that's something that Overwatch does really, really well, is always making it winnable. You know, there's no forfeit button for a reason. The game is always technically winnable. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, especially in like Clash per se. But the game really does do a good job of tricking you into thinking it's winnable, tricking you into thinking that you're gonna be able to give it back. And I think the big trick at the end of the day is that it is. It's not really a trick. It actually is winnable. It's just going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. Or not even a lot of time, just a lot of effort and a lot of outplay on your part. And it makes you feel really good when you do it. So for me, I would say that Overwatch does have the right idea with the kind of tug of war style of game modes. Now Clash is a different story because it's not as granular as Push, and it's all point based, and I think that one needs a little bit of help, a little bit of, you know, work done on it, which we'll see in season 13, I'm sure. But yeah, that's kind of I wanted to talk about that because I do like Push, and I think Deadlock has actually made me appreciate the game mode more so than I think I ever could just playing Overwatch. So those are my 3 big points. The only other things I want to talk about is that we take Overwatch gunplay for granted. I don't think Deadlock's gunplay is amazing. That is kind of on purpose. It feels like all the guns have like spread, and they're not designed to be super beams. They're supposed to be a MOBA game. They don't want you to just take over by being insanely good at shooters. It is, again, it's a MOBA at the end of the day. It's a MOBA where you're shooting and running around. It is not a shooter with MOBA elements like Overwatch is. So I completely understand why. There's plenty of mechanical stuff, plenty of skill shots, all of that, but at the end of the day, it is primarily a MOBA. Also, funny thing that I don't know if this is a lesson. Again, this comes down to, again, there are builds and items that will minimize this, so that's why they're kind of in the game. But there's a lot of stuns in this game. There's a lot of stuns, and plenty of them that you can't exactly play around so much. Remember the 7 stun that I have, where if you just get hit by it, you just have to take it unless you have an item remover or an item debuff or like an ability debuff, stuff like that. You kind of just have to take it. And I find it annoying to deal with, although I completely understand that, again, there are ways to get around it. It's just not counterplaying like an Overwatch. Now, Overwatch has its own faults about outplaying stuns because, let's be real, for some characters, it's just not an option. But in Deadlock, it is much more about the build and everything. And to me, that is much less gratifying than actually, you know, me just hitting my active item when a stun is about to hit me, and I know it's going to hit me at an exact moment, is less interesting than like juking it out or baiting it out or something like that, which you could technically do in Deadlock. But again, a lot of abilities are like lock-ons and they won't cast until, you know, you're in position and stuff like that. So Yeah, I think, for a long time, Overwatch's CC has been sensationalized, and Deadlock has a lot of its own CC that I don't think a lot of people are talking about as much. In fact, I think it's more, and I think there are a couple characters. I'll admit, I play Viscus. I love the goo ball, but it's literally just a chain CC ability as an ultimate that you can have up pretty often, especially if you want to do like cooldown reducer on it. So yeah, that's it's you can really feel it. So yeah, I think that's basically all I have. I want to hear from you guys. Have you played Deadlock? What do you think of it? What do you think of it in compared to Overwatch? And I don't know, what are some things that you want to see in Overwatch from Deadlock, or maybe some things in Deadlock that you want to see in Overwatch? Please let me know down below what you think. Like and subscribe while you're at it. I do really appreciate it. This was streamed live, twitch.tv/Lane Hemingway. That's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays is when I go live. Always something to talk to me about. Always try to do a discussion when I am live. And join my Discord. It is down below. You should send me your hot takes, your replay codes to take a look at. Anything general Overwatch talk, you can find it down there. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good day.